Hi, this is Jonas, and in this short video we'll create a custom Amazon AMI image for use with vSphere and Terraform. So to create this, we download the OVA, as listed at the bottom, and to bootstrap it we have a seed ISO file in which there is a metadata and a user data file for network settings and user settings respectively. So there's actually a pretty good web page outlining the steps for doing this, and we will be following some of those steps, but in a slightly different order. So we need to prepare the ISO image with the metadata and user data as we described, and we need to download the OVA file, and it's available for a variety of different hypervisors, and we'll go for VMware in this case, of course. So let's just start with downloading the OVA file. And we put this in a new folder. We might as well name that AMI, Amazon Machine Image 2, and OVA. And it's possible to go up a directory here. So if we do that, we'll see that there's a variety of more files in there, among which are the seed.iso file, which is a sample. So let's just download that and have a look at this sample and see how they've done it there. Maybe we can copy a few of the settings out there for our own setup. So we're going to look at the files now and see what we have. We got the OVA and we got the seed.iso file. So we go into the seed example folder. I'd like to have a look at what's in this ISO. And in order to do that, we need to mount it. So I'll create a mount point, and then we mount the ISO file as a loop device. And once we have that done, we can see what's inside. And obviously we got the metadata and the user data files in there. Now we'd like to modify these to suit our environment and to be used with Terraform. So in order to do that, we need to copy these out, since the ISO is read-only. So we'll create a different folder to hold those files, and just name that seed config. We enter that folder, and then we copy out the files from the ISO, from the mount point that we made earlier on. So now we have them, a copy of those locally here. And we actually don't need the ISO anymore, so I will unmount that, and then we can remove those files. And we get rid of those files, and what we have now is, I'll just have a look at what's there right now. We got the OVA file, of course, and we have this new folder with the metadata and user data files, and they are in read-write format now, so we can change them. So if we look at the metadata, we can see that this is primarily about the host name and the network settings. So if we modify this, we'd like to have a different host name. So perhaps we can use AMI2 -template, for example, since we're going to use this as a template for Terraform. Now I haven't been able to get Terraform to work with this using static IPs, so I will change this to DHCP. And that means we can take away all these IP settings. We need to add one more line though, and that is to make sure that this interface is brought up automatically at boot up. So auto Ethernet 0. And that's all we need to do for the network and the host name, so let's just save that and exit. Now the other thing that we need to do is to add our user settings. And the ISO file had an example file with a lot of stuff in it. You can see we have the default EC2 user, we got a user 1, user 2, and user 3. And user 3 actually has an SSH key, which is useful, so that's good. Maybe we can reuse user 3 and add in our own key and our own settings. User 1 has some good settings as well, like to add the user to the sudo group and make sure he can sudo without password. So let's just copy those out, and we put that under user 3. And we go in and we can change the username. I will change it to my name. You can change it to whatever you want to use, of course. We go down and modify the lock password setting to be false, and then we can change our RSA key. So the RSA key that's included here is apparently belong to Praveen, which is good, but not very useful for us. So I'm just going to delete this and add my own key. So just feel free to copy and paste your own public RSA key in here. I just copy and paste mine. It's very easy to mess up this YAML file if indentation etc. isn't correct. So in case you use this later on and you find that the username and the passwords that you set don't work to log in with, most likely this YAML file formatting isn't correct. So be very careful when you update it. Now we don't actually need these settings for user 1 and user 2, so I'm going to just delete those. So this is starting to look like something now. So we have the default EC2 user and we have our modified new user who can log in with sudo and doesn't have to use password for sudo either. There is one more thing we need to add to this though, and that is when we run this, the cloud init settings for this VM will automatically reset the network settings every time it boots, and we don't necessarily want that to happen in our VMware environment. So I'm going to copy and paste out these settings, which will prevent that from happening. I'll just add that at the end of the user data file, and we'll save that. So now we have our metadata and our user data files all set up. And we do need to add them to the c.iso file, and the command for doing so is listed here. I'm just going to copy and paste that command out and run that locally. You can see that that outputs a c.iso file, and in that file it puts the user data and metadata files. And it's extremely quick to run it, and when we're done we have this ISO file available for us. So if we now look at what we have, we got our OVA and we got our new customized seed.iso file, and that's all we need to get this VM up and running. So we go to our VMware console and we can deploy the OVA from here right now, but what we want to do first is to make sure that we have a way to mount the seed.iso file. And you could put that on any data store you want. I'm going to put that on an NFS file share that I have. But anything works, of course, as long as you can access it from vSphere. And the easiest way for me to get that file across there is just to use SCP to copy it. So I'll just do that right now and copy out the c.iso file to my NFS server, which is named Blue. I'll put that in the right ISO directory. This of course depends on your environment, whatever you're using on-prem. And that is now copied across. If we refresh this, we should be able to find that the data store now has that c.iso file, and we can see it there. Now we're ready to deploy this VM. You go back to the inventory and deploy the OVF template, or OVA template I guess in our case, and just use that file that we downloaded earlier on, the OVA. And it's essentially just, we just go next. We've got to update the name to something a bit more manageable. We add our compute resources and of course our storage. And since we set our network to be DHCP, make sure you pick a network with the DHCP server available. And that is deploying now. So if we go and have a look at it, we'll see that in a few seconds that should be done. And once it is done, we have the OVA deployed, but we need to make sure that it boots with that ISO file, the c.iso file. So we'll go in and edit the settings. And if you look here, we can actually see that it doesn't have a CD drive. We're just going to add that as a new device, and then we add the c.iso file to it from the data store that we just copied from the NFS ISO data store. And there we have the c.iso. And just save that. Make sure that it will be mounted on boot or connected on boot. And that is it. So now we can power this on and see if it actually deploys itself correctly. You open our remote console as well so we can see what it's doing. So it's going through the setup steps now. Adding in our user data and metadata information that we specified. And with the hit of the enter key, we should be able to get the login prompt. We can try to start with just logging on with the standard EC2 user, see if that works. And that's no problem. How about our customized user? Yeah, that's no problem either. Very good. So we can log in fine. Now, generally we would access this, of course, over the network. So if we try to use our SSH key and access this on the IP address that has been assigned to it, or at DHCP, see if that works. Just do an SSH, specify our key, and the IP address that we just copied out of vSphere. Not a problem at all. Now, since we're going to use this as a golden image for Terraform, we might as well update it to make sure we have the latest versions of all the packages. So I'm going to do that right now. And this shouldn't take more than a second or two. So there we are. And that's all we need to do. So might as well just shut this down, and the next step will be to use Terraform to deploy this into a few different instances. So I prepared a Terraform script, and I'll put this up on GitHub so you can get it from there. If you have a look at it in Atom, we have our general login information for vSphere, username, a very secure password, and also make sure that if you're using this in a lab to disable SSL certificates. We're going to deploy 3 VMs in this case. We just specify all details for the resource pool, VM folder, and all that. And we just set some name to this. I'm just going to use Amazon AMI2 VM, and then we have a number at the end specified by how many VMs then that we're deploying. And we're updating the CPU to 4 and with 8 gigs of RAM. And then you can just add the name of the port group or the network that you're going to deploy this into. And since we're using DHCP in this case, we're just using double quotation marks with nothing in between. And that's really all you need for the Terraform script. So I'm going to just exit out of this. And then we can do a Terraform init. Make sure that we have everything downloaded required for this module. And we can do a Terraform plan. We'll just save that into linux.plan, and then we can leverage that later on when we actually do the deployment. And that looks fine, everything is green, so we just run a Terraform apply with our new plan. And we'll see if this actually deploys these VMs for us. It certainly starts doing so. If we go in and look at vSphere, we can now see that the Terraform VMs folder have these 3 VMs in it. So that looks pretty promising. And they are now booting up, being customized. I'm just going to speed this up a little bit. It doesn't take that long. Actually, if we look at it at the end, you'll see it takes exactly 1 minute, 0 seconds. Now we have our 3 VMs, and they have an IP address each. Let's see if we can actually SSH into this and access the OS. Just pick one of these. And just like we did before, I'm just going to go and do a reverse search and enter in our IP address. Yep, not a problem at all. So that looks like that has worked perfectly well. So now you have an Amazon Linux AMI, which is customized for you, and we have to be able to deploy that with Terraform in our local vSphere environment. That's all. So we're just going to destroy that and clean up. So I hope that will work smoothly for you in your environment, and I hope that has been useful information. Thank you.